Good evening, everybody. I want to thank everyone for attending this call. Some of you will have already been to some of our previous community engagement sessions that we have run, and this is the next in a...
So we've currently got more than 50,000 people in hotels, and the cost is a staggering £8.2 million a day. That's the cost of hotels. We're also supporting, in total, more than 100,000 asylum seekers with accommodation. So we've got a statutory duty, or the Home Secretary has a statutory duty to provide accommodation to asylum seekers that present as destitute and need accommodation. So we're in a situation where the law requires us to provide accommodation. So what we're looking to do is to try and do that in the most cost-effective, value for money way that we can do, whilst also at the same time there are a number of government initiatives you have seen around trying to tackle the flow of small boats, and whilst those measures kick in, it's really important that we stand up alternative large sites, and you would have seen some of those in the media, and we're cracking on with doing that. So that's a bit of a context to the background and the emergency. I thought I'd also say that just by way of reassurance, that when asylum seekers come into the UK, they go through a very thorough screening and processing function that's a facility that's available to the Home Office at Manston. So at that point, they get access to healthcare, any treatment that they need, of any sort of acute needs. They also get a thorough identity screening, biometric screenings, security screenings, and then those people are then processed out of Manston into what we call ring-fenced hotels, where they're held for a short period before moving them onto a large site or to hotel accommodation. So that's the brief flow of the journey. I'm going to hand over to Ant in a minute. He's going to tell you a bit more about some of the facilities that we create when we stand up a large site. And at its heart, when we stand up a large site, what we're looking to do is provide enough facilities and amenities that are basic, fit for purpose, meet all legal requirements, but also at the same time avoid the need for asylum seekers to be able to need to use the facilities that are available to the general public, to sort of spare the general public from, you know, the additional burden on healthcare. So we provide additional funding for healthcare, and we provide a healthcare facility on site. We also provide amenities and activities so that people, as far as possible, don't feel the need to leave the site. Although it's non-detained, we always go on the basis that it's as self-contained accommodation as possible. So I'll hand over to Ant, and he'll tell you a little bit more about some of the facilities that we're planning to stand up in Scampton and how that's going to work. So I'll hand over now and look forward to your questions shortly.
Right, hopefully this is working now. I'm Anthony, and I'm work for the Home Office, and I'm in charge of mobilising the site here at Scampton. Perhaps to give you a bit of an introduction to the site and what it will look like as accommodation for asylum seekers. So as Dave says, we have a statutory duty to accommodate asylum seekers, and as part of that, Scampton will form one of the different options in which we can accommodate asylum seekers. The site will accommodate up to 2,000 people. We'll start off with a phased approach, so we'll start off with smaller numbers, around about 50, and then it will increase over the coming months until we're aiming to get to that full 2,000 by the end of the year. We'll assess how we go along with that phased approach and make adjustments along the way if we need to. It will be a mixture of using some of the existing buildings that are on site by renovating them, and then also a mixture of modular accommodation as well. The site will be non-detained. That means people are free to come and go from the site. There will be security on the site, and there will be access controls from the site, so we will know at any one time who's on the site and who's not. Again, as Dave mentioned there, one of the key design things about the site is that it's designed to be self-sufficient, or as self-sufficient as possible to minimise the impact on the surrounding community. And there are various ways in which we've gone about that, including having primary health care on site and having activities and health shop, recreation, trying to minimise the need for people who are accommodated on the site to leave the site. Where there is a need for them to leave the site, we will put on buses and coaches and shuttles to nearby towns and cities. And also to help minimise the impact on the local community, we've also provided funding to local partners such as police, the local authority, and also healthcare. So I think at that point I'm going to hand over to Katie now, who is working with Serco, who's going to operate the site for us.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie, as Anthony says. I currently work for Serco. In terms of what my role is for Serco at the moment, it is obviously, of course, to mobilise the site for occupation by service users. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Serco and the work that we do in terms of an asylum and immigration setting, we provide the day-to-day support for asylum seekers both across the northwest and the Midlands and East of England region. So for the purposes of obviously Scampton, this site falls within Midlands and East of England region in terms of kind of day-to-day delivery. I think there may be some questions about what that means in practical terms for the individuals that are within our care, but broadly that will mean day-to-day support. There will be a wraparound support provision from housing officers that are supporting the day-to-day. As Anthony says, there'll be a security provision, and then there are a whole host of other roles that sit in a supporting function in and around the contract as well. Obviously, from my perspective, there's a number of key focuses. Firstly, we are able to operationally deliver the site day to day to make sure that people are cared for appropriately and that they have the access to the right services available. And also, I guess, secondary to that, how we work with our key partners in ensuring that we are aligned in terms of the work that we do, that we are effectively sharing information, that we've got open lines of communication, and that we're ensuring we're working directly in partnership. I'm sure there are a number of conversations and questions that may come out of that, which will get picked up as part of the Q&A, but primarily the relationship with key statutory stakeholders will be really critical in terms of longer term delivery of the site, and particularly policing colleagues who we have a very good relationship with and will continue to do in terms of our day-to-day operations at the site. And I think that's probably about it for Serco at the moment until we get to the Q&A.
Sorry, apologies for that. I was just saying we are about to open the Q&A now for everybody. So we do want to get the most productive dialogue out of this session. I just need to say that we can answer any questions about litigation or any political questions, but please feel free to ask your questions, and we're opening up now for you. So we'll just wait for the first questions to come in, and then we'll hopefully give you some answers that we know you've been looking for. Obviously, just while we're waiting, we'll just start sorting through the questions that are coming through, and I'll hand over the first question.
So I think that first question there is about where will the buses be going. So initially we'll have just a small number of people. So probably initially it will just be to Lincoln, but potentially other areas as well, such as Newark. It will be those larger urban areas where people will go, rather than to any sort of more rural areas or smaller towns. What we're finding at some of our other sites is that actually people are actually quite happy on the site, and so they don't leave the site as much as perhaps we were initially expecting. However, that option is there, and obviously over time, perhaps that might change. So I think that answers the one about the buses. Okay, so I think the next one, there's a question about the stop notice. Again, that's as Melissa just mentioned, that's something about the litigation. So I don't think we can answer that, but I think if Dave might want to say some more on that.
Apologies, I was on mute there. I think we've all done that once, at least once, haven't we? Sorry about that. So I was just saying, I'm really sorry we can't comment on any of the questions about the stop or the enforcement notices or the legal proceedings. There are some questions that I did notice around Serco and how many people Serco have looked after, and I just wanted to add, before Serco, Katie comments, that from a Home Office position, we stand up an oversight team that looks after a location and works very, very closely with our commercial partners. So we work very, very closely on sites that we've got. We've got several large sites. Napier Barracks is 328. It's not in the order of 2,000, but we also have Weathersfield, which we're standing up, which will soon be past the 400 mark, moving up to 1,700 maximum. We've also got several other large sites of 500-600 people. So both our providers and the Home Office are really experienced at being able to manage large sites safely and responsibly. Shall I just see if there are any other questions before people want to come in? How much are we paying for the work on the site? Again, I'm sorry, that's commercial in confidence. We are, as the Home Office, paying out for the renovation of the site. As Anthony said, it's both a combination of renovating existing buildings and it's also modular as well. So we're using Portakabin to supply extra bed spaces for that. We're also supplying money to the local authority in line with our other commitments on how we fund dispersed accommodation. So the local authority will be getting 3,500 per bed space. We also have a primary healthcare site located on site 2, and we also provide additional funding for policing as well as the Home Office. But we can't comment on the total numbers and the value of that.
Okay, so I think there's another question there around about compensation. So the Home Office isn't in a position to offer compensation to individuals or any other organisations. With regards to the regeneration deal, that's that the local authority are pursuing. We're supportive of that, but obviously that would be after the Home Office has had its use of the site. So I think there's, see what other questions are there. So there's that question there Dave mentioned about the highest number of asylum seekers managed by Serco. So I think probably this is a good point to pass over to Katie from Serco to talk about how they sort of manage some of their other sites.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I think firstly the number of individuals that we support from a Serco perspective in terms of the asylum system, broadly in excess of 43,000 people at the moment at any given time. I think it's fair to say, as Home Office colleagues have alluded to, the size of this site is very different to what we typically see within the normal day-to-day operations within the site. So questions about large site provision, there are a number of different types of provision that have been in the contract for some time. So initial accommodation provision, it typically sits at the volume of probably a number of up to maybe 600 individuals on a site. Similarly in hotels, hotels can range from 100 people up to 500 people within a single site setting. So in terms of kind of volume of service users within a single site, we are familiar enough with obviously supporting a large group of people. However, as Dave has alluded to, the Pathfinder sites are obviously the first of its kind in terms of this volume within a single space. I think there was also a question specifically around contact with us directly as the provider. We're working through that at the moment with our stakeholder colleagues. So I absolutely do want to ensure that there is a way that in lifetime the community in particular, if there are concerns, can reach out to us. I don't want that to wait for multi-agency forums and that to be through elected members per se, albeit those forums have a use and a purpose in lifetime. You know, as residents, you will want the assurance that you can reach out to us to raise concerns and that we're able to be responsive and reactive to that. So I'm working through at the moment, particularly with policing colleagues, about how we do that in the most sensible and appropriate way. I think there are some concerns from a policing perspective that we don't want lines of communication to be misused. We want it to be used in the right and appropriate way. But again, we'll just work through that in terms of what that communication looks like, and obviously communicate that out to the community once we've defined that fully and clearly. Initial thinking, I think, would be the one-on-one number would be used, and then there would be a direct line between Lincolnshire Constabulary to ourselves on site, and any immediate concerns can be raised through that methodology. However, that is just in discussion stages at the moment, so once finalised we can communicate that out. I don't think there is any more for me at the moment, so I'll hand back to Home Office colleagues.
Yep, just checking I was off mute. So I think there are a couple of questions I can pick up now before I hand over. So I think there was a couple of questions on the length of stay. So the first thing I can comment on is that we're using Scampton under Class Q planning, which is an emergency planning permission, and that planning runs, I think, until March next year. We have got the litigation, which we're not going to comment on specifically, but we have a judicial review hearing, which is the end of October, and obviously the results of that might also affect the length that we plan to stay. Beyond that, we are looking at other planning options that are open to us to extend the period, but what we can't do is talk at the moment about the length that period will be. So that's what we've got to say on the length of stay. I think there's an interesting question by Victoria about how we support asylum seekers. So just I can say a couple of comments on that are that in terms of the refugees at Scampton, they will have safe conditions. They will have conditions in line with all reasonable standards, so it'll be good standard of accommodation. They will be provided with 3 meals which have been certified as meeting NHS England standards. We will also link them up to migrant help that Home Office have a contract with, so they get support from migrant help. And also Serco and all of our providers have welfare officers on site that do pick up and direct and signpost asylum seekers to support should they need it. We do also, in many locations, work with charities and the third sector. And a lot of that work is really important. So we've got provisions, we can arrange for provisions for voluntary sector to come onto large sites to do various things. I think you mentioned, Victoria, in your question, did you, about teaching English or something like that? But we don't do it formally through ESOL classes, because I think there's a length of stay requirement to qualify for ESOL, but we certainly do arrange for English lessons and cultural awareness and behavioural standards and things like that. Are there any other questions I can pick up quickly? What happens when a crime is committed by one of these immigrants? Has no idea about their backgrounds? Well, policing is obviously delivered on a risk basis, and I know that the police will have provision in place to support the site, but also the police forces do communicate with each other. So the force at Braintree in Essex that supports Wethersfield, and the force in Kent that supports Napier Barracks, are all very, very well linked in, and they've shared practice. And the good news is that certainly for those locations, crime hasn't gone up as a result of having asylum seekers residing there. So it's not the case that we're exposing the community to any greater degree of risk. So crime doesn't go up. Anything more I can comment on? What will asylum seekers do to fill their days? Well, as Ant was saying earlier and I was saying, we've got quite a full programme of activities that we allow people to do on site. So various recreational activities, whether it's sports, whether it's artistic activity, whether it's gym or physical fitness. We try to make sure that asylum seekers have ways and means to occupy their time. We also provide a facility for them to leave the site on shuttle buses should they wish to do so. So we try our best to keep them as occupied as fully possible. Okay, there are a couple of questions there about value for money. So everything we do as a government department is about getting the best value for money for the taxpayer. And as I've said, in regards to these sites, we're certainly looking to move the government away from footing the bill of 8.2 million a day on hotels and returning some of those hotels back to the public's use. And I think someone comments also, 45,000 hotel rooms were put out of service. That's exactly why we're looking to return those back to public use, back for business, back for tourism, back for local communities. And we've got a programme in the Home Office to exit hotels as fast as we possibly can. And a key part of that is not just to reduce the flow of people coming in needing accommodation, but to maximise the rooms that we use better, and also to stand up larger alternative sites that are more fit for purpose. So I think that ties into that. I think if I'll just hand back to Melissa, and then I'll pick off a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Thanks, Dave. So we've had a question from Rob that says, are you open to listening to the local opinion, or is this a done deal and hence these meetings are just a tick box exercise? So the reason that we have hosted these meetings and previous meetings is to really establish a dialogue with the local community, is to hear your opinions. And we are making sure that we take actions away and look at how we can continue to form a relationship with the community. We have also worked with lots of local stakeholders as well to try and find the best way to collaborate. So it is something that we definitely do take on board, and we do listen to opinion. And just see if there are any other questions. Just one other thing to note is we do put out a newsletter and a fact sheet on the gov.uk website as well, which we regularly update. So all of that, anything that's sort of been said or mentioned in our community events is also reflected in that as well. I'm going to hand over to Ant now as well to pick up the next question.
So I think we've got a couple of questions here around how we're protecting the historic assets on the site. So obviously it's a lot of heritage at this site, and we want to protect that. So there are a number of listed buildings as well as other heritage assets such as the Dog's Grave. So we won't be using those as part of the asylum accommodation, and they will be fenced off and protected, and furthermore that they won't be in the areas. Service users won't have access to them because of the fencing. We've also have been working very closely with partners on this, particularly around historic England, and looking about what we can do to not just protect the buildings as they are at the moment whilst we're using the site, but also preserving them for the future. So a number of these buildings have been deteriorating over recent years, and so we're looking at what we can do in order to protect and preserve those buildings, such as repairing roofs and things like that. There are areas, some of the buildings, not just the listed buildings, but also there's the officers' mess, which is there's an application in to list that building, and that has various holes in the roof and things like that. So we're looking to repair that. I think looking at this, there was also a question around about some of the protests. So we're aware that obviously there have been quite regular protests outside the front gates of the site. Most of the time they're quite small numbers. We're sort of talking about 5 people or so, and they've all been most of the time really quite peaceful. And so if that were to escalate, then we would then obviously would get the police involved in that at that stage, as that's sort of outside of our gates. With regards to, we do have 24/7 security on the site. Since the site has transferred from MOD to Home Office, we've significantly increased security, both the numbers of staff that we have on site and also some of the other security assets such as CCTV, thermal CCTV and that sort of thing as well. At that point, I'll probably pass over now to Katie from Serco, who's in charge of managing some of the security on the site.
Yeah, so I think there's probably a few questions in the chat that perhaps it would be pertinent for me to pick up from a Serco perspective. So I think just on the security point, as Home Office colleagues have alluded to, obviously we're being asked when the site goes live to provide security provision to ensure the integrity of the site. One of the things I think that has come up consistently on the back of that conversation are concerns, obviously, from a community perspective about what that means for the wider community, and particularly the residential area adjacent to the site, and what's our responsibilities. So I think the first thing to say is, obviously, as the accommodation provider for the site, it's our responsibility to make sure that that site is safe and secure, and we will do that. However, I think there's a number of questions, particularly around the school and movement of young people in the mornings and in the afternoons, between both the nursery and the school, and potentially at the bus stop as well. So I think from a Serco perspective, notwithstanding the fact that the security provision is specifically for the site and that's what we're being asked to provide, I think it's absolutely incumbent on us to have a sensible conversation with the community and also with the head teacher and the manager of the nursery in terms of how we just provide some assurance and allay some of those concerns, particularly in the early stages. So one of the things that I will be looking to do is the roaming vehicle that we have on site for the morning and the afternoon periods, making sure we've got some visibility presence there. So if any concerns, they can be raised directly with our security staff on that side of the fence. I think we need to strike a balance between unsettling people, but also being visible and present and accessible for people if they have concerns. On the general point around protests, I think it's fair to say that, you know, the nature of asylum is something that unfortunately we do have to deal with. And as Ant has typically said, we see that that's broadly peaceful. One thing that probably isn't public and isn't wholly known will be the level of information flow and intelligence sharing and kind of dynamic risk assessment that we do on a day-to-day basis in live time, and our engagement with our policing colleagues at various levels, and that ranges through different mechanisms. But it's fair to say that in terms of a joint situational awareness, that is a consistent piece. We're not reactive, so we are reactive in terms of if we don't know information, we have to react in live time. Typically, that is not the case. Typically, there was a lot of information intelligence that will be known ahead of any such instances taking place, and there's a lot of proactive work that's done to plan for any such instances happening. I think the other pieces that have come up, there's a couple of questions I think Dave touched on, in particular the activities piece. So what types of activities? This site, obviously, I think there's been a question particularly around the winter months. So I think absolutely we acknowledge in the winter period in particular, the outdoor, in much the same as you or I, if we were out doing recreational activity, it's far less appealing in the winter months to be doing that outdoors. So what we are doing is working with the Home Office to make sure that in terms of the buildings, we're feeding into that process around what we understand from our existing sites, what we understand from our service user population at the moment about the types of activities that would best benefit them. And that can range from outdoor activities like football, it can range from pool tables, it can range from art classes. There's a whole variety of different activities that we're more than happy to explore. And the best way of course, making sure that the site lends itself in the right way to what the service users want is to ask them the question. So once we've got individuals on site, will form part of a kind of a customer insight piece with them. So there's things that we might assume would be a benefit to them that they would enjoy, and actually they would prefer something else. And we need to be fluid with that, and we need to be able to be responsive, and of course we will do that. And I think there was another question in particular around third sector engagement. So from a Serco perspective, absolutely. Obviously, we're recruiting for a designated partnership manager for the site. That individual's role will be what it says on the tin, it will be partnership. So that will range not just from a statutory stakeholder perspective, but also with our third sector colleagues, and really welcome opening those lines of communication when obviously the point is right and appropriate to do that. I think on the funding point, Dave, I'll probably have to hand back to you because that specifically is a question about obviously funding flow to the third sector organisations, and I will pick up any other questions for Serco as appropriate as we move through.
So I've got a couple of questions just to touch on. One is, I think somebody was asking for reassurances that the site won't be expanding more than the 2,000 service users that we've quoted. So there are absolutely no plans to go beyond the 2,000 service users that we've quoted. And we will get there in a very, very controlled and phased way, as Anthony has said. So as each service user comes onto the site, they are provided with a full health screening. And they have bloods taken, a full health assessment is made. They're asked not to leave the site until those have come back, and then any appropriate treatments are given. So we make sure that those people are fully fit, well and healthy, and well looked after. So in order to do those screenings, we need to work very closely with obviously our medical centre, and that in a sense gives us a restriction on the numbers that we want to bring onto the site on a daily basis. And we are thinking about 50, it may well go to 30. We're just going to work out what that optimum number is. And also it's worth noting that our suppliers, including our providers, instead of suppliers, our providers, including Serco, do a very thorough induction process with each service user. So they're taken through, the contract, the behaviours that we expect from them, the standards we expect from them, and the commitments that they need to adhere to in terms of, cultural norms and being good neighbours. So we're very keen that induction is done in a very, very effective way, and so we do that in a very controlled way with small numbers to make sure that it's done well and people get it. There are a couple of questions about will there be religious practice available, religious facilities available, and there absolutely will be. So whether they're Muslim, Christian, or whatever they are, there will be multi-faith and separate Muslim type spaces available so that people can worship on site. And then I think there are a couple of questions that I saw about the length of stay that we planned, and I did touch on that earlier to say that we are currently using the site under the powers of Class Q planning, and that lasts until next March. We've obviously got the litigation coming in the autumn. Depending on that, we will then seek our options. We will then consider our options, I'm sorry, to look at alternative planning means for a future period, but that future period is not defined at the moment, so we can't come on any more specifically on that one. I think, let me just see if there's any more. There's some stuff about costs which we can't comment on. I think I'm handing back to Melissa now to take a couple of questions.
Hi, thank you. Yes, we've had a couple of questions through asking about compensation for losses of house prices, insurance, and things in that area. Obviously, we completely understand the concerns of the local residents and the community. And what we have is some internal and external multi-agency forums where we collaborate with stakeholders, and that's something that we have been doing and will continue to do going forward so that we can try and mitigate any impact on the local community. Unfortunately, the Home Office isn't able to offer any individual packages of compensation for anything in the area, whether it be the house prices, and I think someone's asked a question similarly about job losses. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can do. Just check if we've got any others. When will people start arriving? Again, that's something that we are looking at and reviewing regularly. As we've said in our newsletter and fact sheet, which we continue to keep updated, it will be in the near future, but we can't sort of give a date as of yet. Just see, I'm handing over now, I think, to Ant.
So we've got some questions here around the traffic and the A15, and it is a very busy road out there. And so obviously our concerns are our safety from for obviously the people accommodated here, but obviously also existing road users. So we've done some calculations on how much traffic we expect to and from the site, and we don't expect that to be more than when the site was a fully functioning airbase. And with regards to the service users, when they arrive on site, they'll receive a full induction. This will include many different things, such as how to be good neighbours, what's expected of them, and also road safety and things like that, which they perhaps might not necessarily be used to from wherever it is that they come from. We've also putting on the shuttle buses to minimise any need to walk out on that road, so they can be taken into, for example, into Lincoln or the nearby towns and cities. So we're trying to minimise as much as possible. I think this links to another question as well about why people are not detained. We have no legal powers to detain people. So in reference to that, if people want to leave the site and walk down that road, there's no legal powers that we have in order to stop them from doing that. They're free to do that. So that's the reason why we haven't detained them. There's another question that I see here around about from the someone working from the University of Lincoln in the Students' Union there. We do have conversations, and in fact I had a meeting last week with some people from Lincoln University and also some of the others, Bishop Crossity and some other colleges and stuff and in the area. We have regular meetings with lots of partners. We call them MAFs, which stands for multi-agency forums, and we have specific ones for specific groups, such for example as health and policing, and one of them is education, and so we regularly meet with those education partners so there is that avenue there, so that any issues can be raised and we can look at addressing them before we go live, and then after we go live, if there is anything that crops up, then we can look to address that and change how we go about operating the site to try and mitigate any impacts there. Whilst I'm on that, I don't see any questions on here about it, but I'll just quickly mention that obviously we have a school really close to the site. It is bordering the school. We share a fence line, and so before we go live, there will be screening along that fence line. That will be a double fence line with 2 layers of screening around there. And we have had some engagement with the local school, in fact earlier this week, with some local parents. There's also another question I see here around about how many people will be in the porta cabins. So at the moment, we're looking at how many buildings we can renovate. Our preference is to put them into the existing buildings so that we renovate and modernise and bring up to a compliant standard the modern building, the existing buildings. So that means that whatever happens to the site afterwards, we're leaving a legacy of an improved and refurbished site. And then any other additional capacity that is needed in order to bring it up to that maximum capacity of 2,000 will be provided through the porta cabins. With regards to individual porta cabins, actually it's quite a mix. There'll be standalone porta cabin units with bedrooms in, and then there's also quite a few units which are porta cabins which are sort of bolted together to make much larger buildings, and in there they will have rooms within them with bedrooms within them with people accommodated. So it is quite a mix. So I think I'm handing over to Katie next.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of questions in there regards to safeguarding, particularly one regards to you ask unaccompanied children. So I'll probably have to let Home Office colleagues speak to the point of arrival, obviously before they land with us at Scampton, and what screening process happens at that point. But just on the point about children, it's correct, this site is not for children. So there was a question particularly around individuals under the age of 18. If an individual was to approach a member of staff to say that they are under that age, there is a specific process that we would follow at that point from a safeguarding perspective. The first would be to ascertain whether that individual has already had an age assessment, and we would do that through Home Office and Migrant Help colleagues. That information will be known. There is an appeal route around the original decision-making process, which I won't go into the detail of from a statutory perspective. I'm sure County Council colleagues are very au fait with the legislation on that, much more than I am. However, if there is an individual who states that they are under the age of 18, we would immediately look to engage with our social care colleagues, and an appropriate age assessment will be done. However, similarly, if an individual has been assessed and it's been determined that they're above the age of 18, then that effectively draws an end to that process. If it was determined that they were under the age of 18, then they would no longer be resident at the site. There would be a process to move them on. There's another question particularly around, I think, what will we do to protect gay people on the site. So I think that probably opens a broader point around kind of safeguarding and vulnerability and wellbeing at the site. So as well as kind of the housing officer support capacity, as well as kind of the partnership manager, who will of course be working with lots of different agencies, both statutory and non-statutory, to make sure we've got the right relationships in place and that we can support people to draw on that kind of broader support, particularly around kind of different matters such as LGBT. But absolutely correct that if someone is raising a concern about their level of need or vulnerability, and we as the accommodation provider believe that that individual is not appropriate for this site based on that level of need, then we have been clear with the Home Office that we will take steps to look to move them to a more appropriate location, to make sure that individual is appropriately safeguarded. So as an example, the question was specifically around LGBT. We have a relationship with a partner that we work with where we stand up specific LGBT accommodation, and that's because individuals in the asylum system need to be able to live freely and have the right, and as people have quite rightly pointed out, that might be something that isn't always possible in a broader setting around asylum with lots of different cultures and beliefs. So without going into too much detail, there's lots of processes, but in terms of kind of the safeguarding more generally, there will be a designated safeguarding officer. That safeguarding officer will work closely with statutory and non-statutory agencies to make sure that needs are met. And I think that's probably it from my perspective at the moment. So Dave, I don't know if yourself or another Home Office colleague want to speak to kind of the you ask screening process at the beginning, at the front end, because I think that's come up a couple of times.
Yeah, happy to touch on that and a couple of other questions relating to that. So we have an allocation policy to select individuals and screen them as being suitable for accommodating at large sites. So the Home Office it tries really, really hard to make sure that we provide accommodation that is appropriate for the needs of individuals. So, that screening will pick up on any vulnerability, any disability or anything like that. And to be on a large site, which is open, you need to be physically able, and people will be screened against a criteria to come onto that site. It's also really important to note that they will be screened already as being an adult to make sure that they are over 18. If there is any dispute when they first arrived, then there is a separate Home Office process that individual will go down to make sure that they're assessed. If they turn out to be a child, there is a separate pathway for accommodation for children, and they are not in scope to be selected to come to a large site, so they're sifted out at the front end of the process. If we do get any disputes, as Katie said, and they are few and far between, but if we do get any disputes in large sites, then there's an age assessment process that we will follow to absolutely make sure that we've done everything we can to make sure that we've cleared that person is over 18 and suitable to be on site. And if it's proven that they're not, we will remove them as soon as possible. So safeguarding is at the top of what we do. I think there are a couple of questions around people not returning and people absconding. So I think the important thing is here, people are free to come and go. They are also free to, if they can, support themselves, and they're also free to tell us that they don't want accommodation. So they're free to do that. We keep registers of all those people who are in our care in all of our asylum accommodation. And if they choose that they don't want accommodation anymore, then that's fine by us. And that support is discontinued and they move on to a different form of Home Office support. So we still keep track on where they are, and we still make sure that we administer the support that they're entitled to. But there are different levels of support. In a site like Scampton, we're talking about full board accommodation where meals are provided, but we do other sorts of support for asylum seekers where they just get subsistence only, and there are other forms that we also do too. Absconding hasn't been an issue for Wethersfield. We've had a couple of people that have decided they didn't want to be accommodated there and who are now supporting themselves, but it literally is less than a handful of people that have decided, and that is their right to do so. There's a question there about the multi-agency forum. So I don't know how you know that they've been cancelled for the last 2 weeks, because they haven't. They were cancelled this week because the SMP, who is the go-between between the local authority and the Home Office, wasn't available because he was on leave this week. But we've had them every single week for some considerable months. I don't know if I was going to touch on any other responses. Let me just check really briefly if there's anything else for me to cover. Right. So I think there are a couple of questions about the advert that Ciro put out, referencing experience of dealing with dangerous individuals, and I'll let Katie speak to that specifically, but that was a mistake by Ciro, and the individuals who are asylum seekers on site they're not criminals, they're not dangerous, and they're actually a really diverse bunch of people. They're from every walk of life. You would be absolutely amazed, as I've been. I've met hundreds and hundreds of asylum seekers, and they come from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds. So I think that was a mistake from Ciro when they advertised for those positions there. I think I'm handing over now, and I'll come back with some questions in a bit.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions through on children's safety and what we're doing to protect schools. So we actually met with parents of the local school and the adjacent nursery as well earlier this week. Again, this is something that we take very, very seriously, and we are going to be putting some screening between the site and the school. I know also that the police do have dedicated police resources around the Scampton site. And it's something, though, as Dave has said, that hasn't been seen on other sites where there is any kind of risk. But obviously we do look at those risks and try and mitigate anything. Additionally, when residents do arrive on site, they are given a full briefing pack, so they understand what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. They have a full orientation around the site and how to sort of navigate that and the local community. Within the briefing, it has lots of information about what constitutes appropriate behaviour and sets out very clearly both acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, as well as their responsibilities to act as good neighbours themselves. Similarly, we've had some questions about the safety of the elderly, and again, all of these police resources, the dedicated security that we have on site as well, hopefully can alleviate some of those fears. I think that I'm handing over now to Ant. The next question.
Hi, so I think it's actually Katie who's next on the.
Yeah, so I think first thing, let's address the point on the job advert. So I completely appreciate from your perspective, looking from that on the outside in, me sitting here saying that was an error is not going to fly. It's not going to wash. It's the truth. The way that we operate in terms of Serco, as you can imagine, are a large organisation, so recruitment is not done at a contract-based level. Of course, recruitment in terms of interviews, etc. But in terms of job adverts and actually starting the recruitment process, human resources, which is obviously central within Serco UK and Europe, and the wider Justice and Immigration Directorate, they will manage the adverts. Unfortunately, we ended up in a position where both ourselves and a custodial setting were advertising for a safeguarding officer. And unfortunately, the bottom half of the template, they failed to update from the previous advert for a custodial safeguarding officer, which, as you can appreciate, in custodial, we absolutely do deal with dangerous and disruptive people for all the obvious reasons that it's a custodial environment and people are there for a particular reason. So it may come across disingenuous, and I absolutely understand people's concerns. But when we say that was an error by Serco, it wasn't an error by Serco at a contract level in terms of my role and responsibility at this site. I wrote the job description for the safeguarding officer. There's absolutely no reference to dangerous and detained people within that, simply because we don't deal with that cohort of people on this contract. So more than happy if people have concerns about that to go into that in more detail and give a bigger outline outside of this forum on what the job description actually is and what it is that's expected to be provided by that role. But it very much is an advocacy role. So the safeguarding officer is there to act as a conduit to make sure that we have a clear understanding of an individual's needs and level of vulnerability and take appropriate steps to get them the right support to meet that need. It's not about managing dangerous individuals. So again, I can only apologise for that error, and believe me, I had some choice words to say on it myself. I think there was another question particularly around volunteering, so whether the individuals can volunteer. Yes, is the short answer. We've certainly done that on our core contract. That, of course, is predicated on organisations or community groups having opportunities for them to engage in. Typically, we've done a number of activities whereby our service users and our staff, because we give 2 volunteering days per year to staff for the opportunity of paid work to go and do volunteering. We typically do events in conjunction, so we'll have a group of staff that will go with a group of service users to do a particular volunteering event, and that can range from we've done painting and decorating in community centres, we've done supporting farmers with lambing and lambing season. There's various bits of activities, and I'm more than happy that if there are opportunities or offers for that type of volunteering opportunity for our service users, that we absolutely do take advantage of that. As you can appreciate, human beings generally, we feel better and well in ourselves when we feel we've got a focus and a purpose, and volunteering absolutely forms a really critical part of that for our service users. I think I'm handing back to yourself now, Ant.
Yeah, so there's been a few different questions about what assessments have been done. So as part of setting up the site, there's a whole load of different surveys and risk assessments and environmental assessments that we've done. Some of them are also supporting the planning permission that we've got in order to do this work, and some of them are informing us in our decisions of which buildings to use and where to place the modular buildings. Included in that is an environmental impact assessment, and that environmental impact assessment includes a whole load of different things. Some of the things that we've already spoken about, such as traffic to and from the site and the possible impact of that, any impact on wildlife, and also things which I see have also been mentioned, such as about noise and light pollution. So all those things are fed into it, including the type of lighting we'll use, how many people are on site, and all that kind of thing. And that all feeds into the environmental impact assessment, which is assessed by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and they make an assessment of whether or the level of impact, and they've deemed that it's not a level of impact that would constitute it being what's called environmental impact development, and so we're proceeding on that basis. There's also been some questions in the chat about what facilities will be on site, and would there be a gym. So there will be gym, sort of physical exercise equipment. Also, obviously, it's quite a large space, outside space here. So also we'll have things such as sports and cricket and football. And again, this is all feeding back into the ultimate design of the site, about trying to make it as self-contained as possible and to reduce the need for those people who are accommodated on site, reduce their need to leave the site. So I think I'm handing over to Dave now.
Yeah, just a couple of responses from me on a couple of questions. So there's a question here about the cohort and why is it male only and not family based? And it is about we need to accommodate single adult males because they make up the vast population of those that need to be accommodated. So I'm not sure of the precise number, but I think it's touching almost 80% of arrivals that we have are single adult males. That's why a lot of the accommodation that we're standing up is for single adult males, because that's the biggest demand on the system at the moment. It's clear that you have a civil servant in the next room posing ridiculous questions. We don't. They're all your own. Is it correct they'll be given £9 a week to live on? Yeah, so there is a small amount of subsistence provided in addition to the accommodation that's provided and the food that's provided, and that's to pay for clothing, transport, any prescription charges or anything else, any incidentals. There's a precise breakdown of how that subsistence is calculated, but yes, they will be getting around about £9 a week on top of that. Are there any other questions I can pick up really quickly? There's some questions I think Anta's touched on noise levels and things like that. And certainly what we'll do, because we've got, as I said, Serco on site 24 hours, we've got security, and we've also got a Home Office oversight team that will work really closely with our provider. We'll deal with any complaints or adjustments that we need to make because of any noise or any other issues that are emanating from the site after dark. So that's something that we can just take away as an ongoing operational thing and look at in those terms. I think I've also seen a question on the length of stay, and that's around 9 months, or at the point at which somebody's asylum decision is ready. So we won't be serving decisions on site, and either as and when their asylum decision is ready, or at the point that someone has reached 9 months, they will move into dispersed accommodation, and that will be all across the UK. So there isn't an unnecessary burden or demand on local authority housing in the areas surrounding a large site. They're spread across the UK quite evenly. I think those are all the questions I can answer in this go, and I'll hand back I think I've dealt with the questions on how long people will be on the site. So they'll be on the site for 9 months. Oh, sorry, over to you, Anne.
There we go. So there's a question here around about the donuts, and people will have unfortunately not the tasty type, but people driving around on the runway. Some of our contractors driving inappropriately around on the southern part of the old part of the runway, and you may have seen that on the news. And that, just to be clear, that behaviour is completely unacceptable. As soon as that information, that video was sent to me on the Friday evening, we launched an immediate investigation. We started looking back at CCTV, and we found out exactly who was responsible for that. And those two individuals, when then were told on the Monday when they arrived, sorry, you're off the site, and they are no longer working here. And that message has been put out, reminded everyone who's working on the site, reminded them of the standards of behaviour that's required and expected from them on the site. And it's quite clear to them now that we do take action when when something like that happens, that they'll be off the site. And so if you do come across anything like that, then we ask you, if you do raise it, then it will be dealt with. There was a question around the university students and international students there. Sorry if I didn't quite answer that fully enough last time when I approached on it, but we do have that mechanism there, and that we already have that regular meeting with educational establishments, including universities, so the issues, if there are any issues like that, they can be raised. If there are any criminal issues such as harassment or anything like that that happens, then that is something that you would expect. You have to call the police about that. But we will also work with the university. So if it does turn out that sort of thing happens, then we can work to see if there's any mitigation we can put in place, and that's not just necessarily with ourselves, but also with policing colleagues as well. Our experience at other sites and locations is that we don't see that sort of thing happening. But if this site turns out to be different, we will absolutely work to act on that with partners and colleagues. I think I'm handing over to Katie next.
Yeah, so I think there's a particular question regards to the staffing model. So in terms of full capacity of 2,000 service users, we're probably somewhere in the region of Serco staff, probably around circa 170 staff at any given time during a day. That will be a combination of housing officers, security guards, catering staff, people obviously driving, delivering activities, partnership working, safeguarding. So there's a whole host of roles that sit in and around the site in terms of its delivery, but as a broad headline figure, that's the number. I think there's been some conversations, particularly, or some questions regards to communication with the community, particularly around respectful language. I think, for someone that's worked with asylum seekers for many years in both a local government and a Serco setting, we're very familiar with asylum seekers and their journey, and the situations that they have to go through, their resilience, but also their needs, but also a massive appetite to want to be positive, contributing members of communities themselves. And I think, for Scampton as a community in the wider area, it is unfamiliar, and appreciating, obviously from my perspective, I've grown up in areas where asylum seekers have been present for the last 20 years, and we've, from a community-based perspective, really reaped the benefits of that in terms of what those communities look like, the value and offer within the area in terms of kind of diversification and the positive attributes from a migration perspective, and maximising the positives from it. So I think there's going to have to be a journey in that space, for all the obvious reasons. But absolutely do agree on that point that, you know, collectively we need to do some work to myth bust and really give people a sense of asylum seekers, who they are and what they're about, which, you know, in my 17 years experience has always been extremely positive. So I think I'm probably handing over to Home Office colleagues now to answer a couple of questions. So I think it's back to yourself, Dave.
Yep, so I think there are a few questions on religious provisions, and I think I've mentioned this before, that we will have provision on site, both multi-faith and for other types of worship. So that is all catered for and arranged on site. That means that you know, if people need to take religious worship, then they can fully do so on the site. I think there are some more questions here about the asylum backlog of cases and crime rates. So firstly, on the asylum backlog, the Home Office has, I think in the last 2 years, quadrupled the number of caseworkers that we've got, and we've also working those cases now more efficiently. And the backlog is underway, is looking good in terms of the processing and the clearing of those backlogs to the targets that we've publicly communicated. So I think we're doing well on that front. In terms of crime rates, the experience we have from talking to police is that crime doesn't go up in areas where we have asylum accommodation. And don't forget, as I said to you at the beginning, I think we've got 50,000 people accommodated in hotels, but we are looking after more than 100,000 people across the UK in different accommodation settings, and there isn't any evidence that's reported to say that crime increases where that happens. That's not to say and be flippant that there aren't occasions that you would have seen in the media where the British public have protested and demonstrated, and those are more of the issues that are prevalent rather than the asylum seekers themselves causing disruption or in fact causing crime. So that's not the case with that one. I think there are a few questions about why we're doing so much for asylum seekers and not the local population. And I think suffice to say that we've got a statutory duty to make sure that we look after people and provide accommodation that is basic but fit for purpose, and that meets our statutory obligation to provide safe and legally compliant accommodation, and that's what we do. The reason we provide other support services, as we've articulated, is not just for the benefit of the asylum seeker. Of course it benefits the asylum seeker, but it's also to take the local pressure off of the local systems. So as regards healthcare, that's something we provide to make sure that the local healthcare is not saturated, and in terms of or potentially not saturated, but also in terms of the other facilities, you know, providing gyms and recreation, they're not available to the general public, but also by the same token, we are giving a substantial amount of money to the local authority, who can invest that money in any thing for the benefit of the community and to impact their view on the impact of the asylum centre on yourselves. But yeah, we do make sure that we provide facilities, because we like to try and provide a self-contained site that is has a community that is healthy, that is occupied, and then I think less likely to be impactful in a negative way on the local community. So I think that's all I've got. Can you confirm they will not be able to bring females on site? No, they won't. They won't be able to bring females. They won't be able to bring alcohol. And I think some of these questions are duplicates. So I'll hand over now, and if there are any more questions I'm required to answer, I'll come back in a bit.
Okay, so I think there are a few questions popping up around the runway, and will we be using the runway to site porta cabins and the modular units on there? And the answer, that's a simple one to answer. The answer is no, we're not. We're using some hard standing, which is closer to the hangars, and we won't be using that runway to put any porta cabins down there at all. There's another question here around personal needs, and will the personal needs of those being accommodated there be on site? Yeah, yes, their personal needs will be, all their basic personal needs will be provided for on site where possible. So, for example, there's food, as toiletries, and your primary healthcare, that will all be provided. And so the £9 odd a week that they will get will be for things like in the shop, like snacks and the like. And there's a question here also about charities. Will charities be involved as providing stuff as well? Undoubtedly, there will be some charities who want to come and provide stuff at our other sites that happens. So, for example, down in Wethersfield, there are a variety of things which are often offered to the people accommodated on the site, and we can facilitate that. There's another question around different languages. So yeah, there will be people here with lots of different languages, but we're well used to doing that. So Serco and other providers across our estate are well used to working with people who have very different languages and might not necessarily speak English. So a lot of the sort of reading materials and the signage and that sort of thing are in multiple languages. And we also use services such as Language Line to help communicate to people who English is not their first language. Okay, I think it looks like maybe it's Katie next.
Yeah, so I think in terms of there's a few questions from a Serco perspective that I think probably been touched on in part by the Home Office, but I think just a benefit, maybe a bit more of a robust answer from an operational perspective. So there's been a question specifically around training for new staff. So yes, for this site, of course, we need to recruit new individuals to support the asylum seekers themselves. There's a few bits that fall within that. So firstly, we need to ensure that individuals that come into the role have a full understanding not only of the role that they're going to be delivering, but the asylum system as a whole. Some of the key things that they need to be aware of in terms of service user wellbeing and support, broader functions across the contract that underpin and support not just this site but the operation as a whole across the two contract regions. So there is a 3-day induction, which is very comprehensive on all those points. Alongside that, there are a number of other obviously critical training that we would need to do. So there's practical on the job training. So we have a full suite of operational processes and guidance that would need to be followed and adhered to. So that will be peer-to-peer support in terms of familiarisation. So we will bring in staff that are currently operating on other sites who've got that experience to support with new recruits to make sure that they are able to obviously do the job and they've got some confidence and support and ability over lower numbers to kind of build up their confidence and capabilities. And we won't step away that support until we're confident that everybody's clear in terms of what they're doing. There are obviously experienced staff, such as myself, from a leadership perspective, who will be kind of driving that delivery day in, day out. Safeguarding, obviously a big one. There's lots of different strands to safeguarding, so it's not just a one course on safeguarding. There's multiple different strands to safeguarding that need to be considered, that people need to be fully trained on and aware of. And without boring colleagues with the detail, there's lots of other courses and obligations that, from a mandatory perspective, all members of staff, regardless of the role that they were doing, would be expected to have in terms of their role on site. I think there's been a question particularly around health, and I think Home Office colleagues have probably touched on the arrangement with health around kind of the funding and commissioning framework. But I think what's important as part of that is probably to draw some focus on the operational work that we're doing with health colleagues. So we talk a lot about funding, we talk a lot about commissioning, but actually what does that mean in practical terms? So from a Serco perspective, it's really important that when an individual arrives with us, that they can access that healthcare swiftly at the point of arrival. We're working with health colleagues not just from an ICB and provider perspective, but also health colleagues from a public health perspective, who I think there's been a question particularly around communicable disease. So the process will be such that when individuals arrive with us, the first point after an initial briefing will be to get that health assessment. and that will be before all else, to make sure that they've got the appropriate screening. Any needs are identified immediately so that we're all clear in terms of that and can take appropriate steps. And then if there is a concern around communicable disease, there is a whole process that we have in place. We've agreed with health, particularly around making sure isolation, and that would involve us providing food provision, etc., to people in their own rooms if needed for the period of time. So just an assurance on that. And I think the other bit around risk cases, so I think there's a lot of concern, particularly around people's perception of asylum seekers. I can confidently say, having managed multiple different roles within Asylum over many years, and the work that we do with police, as it stands at the moment, across 43,000 people, and bearing in mind our entire estate, the Pathfinder accommodation, there's going to be a specific filter through in terms of that screening process to make sure that no known risks for those individuals who wouldn't come to this site. But just generally, even in the absence of that across the entire population, there's probably around 80 cases at present across 43,000 people that I would say are complex, where we're having to actively manage around management of risk. So that represents less than 0.1% of the population as a whole. So again, just to allay those concerns. I think we're feeding back to Home Office colleagues on the next questions. I don't think there's anything else for me at this moment.
All right, so there's a question about the healthcare, in particularly around Lincolnshire being in Tier 4, and that's something we've been very cognizant of right from the start, and we've had some very early engagement with the local NHS and local integrated care board around this, and we've providing significant funding in order to get a third-party supplier to come in and provide healthcare on the site. As Dave said, it's always a difficult one when people say, "Oh, it looks like we're doing a lot more for this, the people who are accommodated on the site, rather than and people are accommodated on the site are perhaps getting some things that aren't immediately available in the local community." It's a difficult one about whether we do that, or alternatively we put that extra pressure on the resources within the local community, and often we come down on the site that actually we want to reduce that impact on the community, as that's why we're getting in that separate health provider to provide that primary health care on site. Let's see, there's another question around about utilities, in particular about sewage, but I can talk about sort of general utilities on site and the capacity of that. Obviously, the site was when it was a working airbase, it supported a lot more people than has been on the site in recent years, and from our assessments that we've done, actually, we're not concerned about the capacity of the sewage and the water. It seems all the surveys we've done have shown that actually there's plenty of capacity there for our use. Okay, I'm not sure. I think I'm handing back to Melissa now.
Thank you. And I think we're getting close to time now. So unfortunately, we are going to be wrapping up now. We do acknowledge that we might not have been able to answer every single question individually, but hopefully we have addressed the main themes that have been coming in through the questions tonight. There have been a few questions that have come through on the stop notices, but as I mentioned earlier, we're unable to speak about legal proceedings. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to answer these. As I also mentioned at the start, this event is just one in a series of community events that we've held, and we're planning more in-person events in the future as well. In the interim, we are going to keep the fact sheet and the newsletter, which are on the gov.uk website, updated. And we're also going to continue to collaborate with some of our other key stakeholders, including health partners, local authorities and the police. So I just want to say thank you very much to everybody for attending, and I'd like to wish you all a fantastic evening. Thank you.
felt that they picked out the questions that they could answer with the usual waffle, and the concerns of the local community was just skimmed over or not addressed at all.
Not very informative. The usual thing we had, the same thing at showgrounds, and I think it's terrible the way the Home Office is treating us.
A lot of people left early, angry. They didn't feel that perhaps the Home Office answered questions honestly.
They just say, oh, we can't answer that, it's subject to legal proceedings, but they haven't stopped work. We've seen them coming and going all day. They're a law unto themselves.